Hello, friends, and welcome back to the mostly weekly series Artist Questions, where we look at some of the biggest questions facing contemporary artists today. My name's Dan Curtis. I'm an artist and a writer and an educator from South London, and this is all made possible by the amazing Exchange Art, where I'm currently working as head of education. And it's also in collaboration with my podcast, The Healthy Artist, that I do with the amazing Martha Lamont. Got a new episode coming out tomorrow. We just did a great interview this morning with the fantastic Claudia Kenner, who is an artist coach, and that was absolutely amazing. So plenty of stuff to see there tomorrow in terms of getting yourself on track and giving yourself the best chance of getting out there and making the best of your work, but also finding your artistic voice. So look out for that one tomorrow. This, my friends, is the last Artist Questions of the year. It is the 10th of December as I record this, and it's been an amazing year. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined, who's asked questions, who's shared the episodes out, and who's messaged me saying they've really got something from this series, this labor of love. It's been a joy to cover so many questions with you, and also to run the courses as well. The Artist Toolkit and the Collector's Art have been both amazing to do, and it's been so wonderful to have so many positive responses. So thank you for all the support. Yes, this is the last of the year, and I think we've done something like 25 episodes this year, 25 hours of questions and chat and courses on top. It's been a wild time, and we've covered a lot. And the last couple of months, really, we've been very much focused in this cycle of looking at things like curiosity, reclaiming our ability to play, and the reasons why artists find it so hard these days to be able to engage with things on a deeper, more experimental level. And we've looked at imposter syndrome, how that gets in the way. And then last week, we were beginning to look at why creative play is so hard because of the idea of our attention being commodified in what's called the attention economy. We looked a little bit at the work of Jenny Odell, who's an amazing artist and writer from the States. And I promised that we would go deeper into that this week for the last one. And I think it's probably, I'm really pleased that it's the last one of this year, because it's probably one of the most important subjects I'll be covering this year in terms of the importance of understanding and rejecting and resisting the attention economy for artists. But many of you might not have heard the term attention economy before, or even know what it means, or have heard it in the background but don't not really sure, you've not looked into it properly. Not looked into it any more than that. But I think it's probably one of the biggest, most important struggles and concepts to understand of our contemporary life. And I think resisting the attention economy is going to be such a big thing for artists in the future. Now, before I go on and explain a bit more about the attention economy, there's a few things I want to reflect on. First off, this is not a episode or a series entirely about phone equals bad, or social media equals bad, or anything digital equals bad, and a call to redeem craft or something like that. There's a lot of those things that come up when you are looking at resisting the attention economy. But we'll come to sort of some false solutions towards the end. But there is this sort of feeling of, if we could return to just making everything by hand, or a kind of past that we used to have, that it would all be better and it would solve these modern issues. But I think a lot of those ideas are also sort of fictional as well. The idea that craft will save us all, can be problematic. But what I say is this is not anti-phone or a rejection of technology in any way. And I want to hopefully give you a balanced view of what the attention economy looks like, and therefore how you can begin to resist it as an artist, and how it might be speaking into your art journey, your art practice, and your art career. So I want to begin by talking about an amazing artwork by an American conceptual artist called Agnes Deans, and it was called Wheatfield. And it was planted in the summer of 1982 in Lower Manhattan. And what Deans did was she planted a 2-acre wheat field right on a extremely expensive choice piece of land in Lower Manhattan. Just 2 blocks from Wall Street, close to the World Trade Centers when they were there, and facing the Statue of Liberty. And like 200 truckloads of dirt were brought, and all the furrows were dug by hand, and the wheat was grown in this space. And on August the 16th, it was harvested, and so started in May, finished in August, and yielded over 1,000 pounds of golden, healthy wheat. Already you can imagine, I mean, so go and look up the piece, Agnes Deans Wheatfield, even now if you want, on your phone or whatever, or after this. It's such an incredible piece of work, and seeing it in the context of the city is so incredible. But of course, planting a field of wheat on a piece of land that's valued in terms of our economy at $4.5 billion, it creates a kind of powerful paradox. And on her writing about it, she was saying the wheat field is a symbol, is a universal concept. It represents food, energy, commerce, world trade, economics, but it also refers to mismanagement, waste, world hunger, ecological concerns, and it called attention to our misplaced priorities. And that calling of attention that Agnes Dean's work does in this area, by dropping something into this busyness, into this capitalist framework, into this idea of endless extraction and profit, to drop something in that is embodied, that is slow, that is growing, that is real, is such an attention focuser. And it's that I want to talk about in terms of today, is how to reclaim that kind of attention within the attention economy. So what is the attention economy? Well, it's probably worth starting by a definition. On the top end, it's basically using what captures our attention as a product. That's selling things that capture our vision and get us to spend more time on apps, programs, streaming services, and whatever else is become the most important commodity across the world. The colonization of the mind, essentially, and of the eyes and of the ears. And it's not something that's new. The attention economy, sometimes people think like, oh, with social media, it's now changed everything. That's when it all happened. Social media has ruined our life. But actually, the attention economy was, begun really in the early 1800s. And in his book, Attention Merchants, the author Tim Wu talks about the beginnings of the attention economy, which began in New York in 1800s, and with a guy called Benjamin Day. Now, Benjamin Day was a printmaker and was trying to create some way of growing his printing press business, and was trying to figure out how he could get more commissions and more sales. So he thought, I'm going to create something sort of like a print-based thing to show off my printing skills that will get people to commission me. But he needed a way of it like being disseminated in mass, right? And at the time, there were such things as newspapers, but they were extremely expensive. They were like six pennies or something like that, which would be essentially only available to the elite. And really, they didn't talk about sort of everyday news of life. Essentially, it was all about business. It's all about trades and, you know, what companies are folding and stock, not the stocks of the time, if that makes sense. And so really open to elite readers. So there was no sort of newspaper for the common everyday person. So he thought, what if I could create a kind of newspaper that was only a penny? So essentially at that time, the same as like a household item, like a bar of soap or something like that, or a brush. And that then everyone could have access to. And so I could, you know, share my kind of printmaking to a huge amount of people. The problem was that each newspaper would cost more than a penny for him to produce. So with that kind of bind, he needed to figure out, how can I make it cheap while also making it, you know, work for me and my business. So he decided on the idea of selling advertising space. So this was the first time that advertising space in this sense became like a kind of public space, but the rather than something you look up to on a board or something like that, something you could hold in your hand. And but the issue was that he needed to capture those readers in the first place to guarantee those he was going to sell the advertising space to a wide readership, right? So how did he go about it? Well, of course, he started printing sensationalist news. So the kind of thing that we're so used to seeing every day in the, you know, the corner shops near our houses, on our social media feeds, on news websites. And his first piece that he printed on his first newspaper, which he called the New York Sun, was headlined "Melancholy Suicide" on in big letters on the front, basically beginning the whole idea of like the headline. Yeah. And it was about a guy who had been sent away to India by his father so that he didn't marry an undesirable woman that his father didn't want him to marry. And then the man took his own life in India. So essentially, it had everything. It had death, love, romance, family issues, all of that. And of course, he sold out that entire first batch of 500 prints, you know, within hours. And that was the beginning of the attention economy, because that was the beginning of the sensational and advertising linking together, like, and then that being in the reader's hands and the reader's mind. And also the thing that he changed with it, which is what's so incredible and terrifying and, you know, horrific in so many ways, is that the person who reads the magazine and sees the advertising has also bought it themselves. So not only could he get money from the advertising, he could get people to essentially buy their own space to be advertised to. And this is the beginning of the attention economy. He started doing that over and over, and then competition rose up. People started to realize that it was actually a really good way, not of disseminating stories, but of making money, right? It's nothing to do with the stories, the quality of journalism. It's nothing to do with transmitting truths. And actually, those early newspapers came up with the whole idea of court reporting, sending writers, which became journalists, into the courts essentially to find the most salacious and sensational news that they could and then print it. And then when eventually happened is that Benjamin Day and the New York Sun essentially run out of stories to print anymore. And so they started making them up. And that's where we get the beginning of entirely fake news ideas. That's the true fake news, right? And he famously printed a story about how a scientists had found life on the moon, complete with pictures and studies, which was all completely made up, all completely fictional. And of course, it sold out instantly. And so this is the beginnings of the attention economy. And you can see how attention combined with advertising can become one of the most valuable commodities out there. So that's a little bit of a history. And now we can see how that works with us in our social media age. The most sensational, reactive headlines are and videos and craziness are the things that most people spend time on. They comment on, they post, they reshare, and also the most things that people have a take on. You see this limited piece of information without context, without really understanding the history or what's going on. It's sensational. You see what is happening. You can then gain your own followers by having an opinion about it, which is another form of attention, and so on and so on, without any kind of slowness or real depth of understanding of these things. There's a great philosopher called Jared Henderson. He has a video series on YouTube where he discusses the attention economy. And from him, I learned about Timothy Wu's Attention Merchants. And he has this great idea of trying to understand the word attention in the attention economy, because the attention part is kind of changed as well over time. And he talks about the difference between attention and the word attending, like the older term. And he said already you can, even just hearing the two words, you can feel the difference. Attending to something is about looking after something that you love, something that we want to commit time to and care for because we love it. Attention within the attention economy, on the other hand, a lot of this stuff that we spend our time looking at or get sucked into is not something that we love at all. It's something that makes us feel comfortable, or it's something that we literally actively hate. And not only partaking in sort of viewing, but also posting into. And therefore, it's this kind of strange thing where we are applying huge swathes of our lives to something which we actually hate. So something that we don't attend to at all, that's simply there to grab our attention. And if you think about it, when you think about the last time you were sort of truly moved by something, when something got you really like rethinking life or got you to a place of calmness, and then when you think about when you're on social media or any other app like this that grabs attention, how close to any of those feelings did you feel? It's very unlikely that you'll feel anything in terms of existential change or spirituality or being moved or at rest or at peace. Yes, there are great online communities, but we'll come to that later. At the moment, we're talking about the sort of the most sensational. It's not there to help us to feel in any way calm or connected with anything. So in many ways then, the idea, the adage from social media is that it's there to connect us, to disseminate information and that kind of thing. But of course, as we've learned so much over these past few episodes, that's not the case at all. And actually, the apps we use do not actually foster space to think clearly at all, because as soon as you're onto one thing, you're onto the next, and there's no space in which to reflect on any kind of narrative in any sense. Therefore, there's no space to grow, no space to be inspired or to connect in any meaningful way. And as the philosopher Byung-Chul Han says, who we'll be reading a bit more from today, the apps are simply designed to create data out of the events of your life. And I think that's a really important distinction in terms of how the attention economy works now. Because not only is it just advertising now, it's you using your own life to create the data that is needed to sell the things back to you. So I just need to go and I just realized I forgot to get Byung-Chul Han's book. I did this on another episode the other day, didn't I? I forgot a book and I had to run and get it, but I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to put some music on for you. this time, so it's not as awkward. I just realised I've left it in the other room, so I was reading it in there. A return. Seamless. Seamless, we might say. Okay, let me load this up here. There was some ADHDing going on there where I left it in the other room. So let's go back to Byung-Chul Han and looking at the wonderful book we're looking at in a sec. So I think that, why does this then feel so hard for artists in particular, the attention economy? And that's what we're coming back to today. Now we've got a bit of an understanding of what the attention economy is, its history, where it began, and the idea that, you know, we need to reclaim our attention. But why is it so hard for artists in particular, this attention economy? I've got a couple of theories, and I just want to share a new one with you now of my own, and then go into some others' thoughts as well, based on some of the things I've been reading this past couple of weeks. One theory I've got is that when it comes to social media and the attention economy, the whole thing thrives on perception management and a kind of personal enactment of one's own brand, right? And we'll talk a bit more about that when we come to Han's book in a minute. But when you think about something like on social media, like a get ready with me video, and, you know, someone in their bathroom doing their makeup or something like that, very popular format on social media, it grabs attention because of its intimacy, the sort of feeling of revealing everything behind the scenes. And we'll come to hear more about this in the attention economy at the moment, in a minute. But of course, it's not really revealing behind the scenes. It's essentially another advertising space. But what I find interesting about something like a Get Ready With Me video, or a GRWM video, as they're called, is that at least that revealing of the self and the enacting of the personal is something that everyone understands. And particularly if you're someone who wears makeup, you know, that kind of video, it's something you can relate to. And you feel a personal, intimate connection because it's something repeatable. Getting yourself ready, going into a bathroom in front of a mirror, it's a thing that many, many, many people can share and understand. Whereas when it comes to artists showing themselves behind the scenes, which is so much of what we're told to do on social media, show sort of what your process is, what's going on behind the scenes, what's happening in the studio, etc. I think that for many artists, there isn't really then a pattern to follow of what that might mean. The behind the scenes of making work might be an incredibly personal and subjective thing that you engage with. It might be incredibly exposing to talk about things behind your work. And also, not many or only certain types of art behind the scenes look good on a video. If you're a conceptual artist, a behind the scenes video is not really going to hit it compared to someone who loves to, you know, spin paint pots with holes in the bottom of them to create spiral patterns on a canvas. That works grabbing your attention on attention economy video, right? Whereas, you know, showing the behind the scenes of a conceptual practice doesn't always make sense and might not be something that wants to be shared, the intimate making space of the studio, right? And I think it feels so strange because we don't know what we're doing. And then we see some artists who are doing things like making those videos where you turn a painting round to the camera, sort of reveal it to the camera, which is such a strange thing to do. That never happens in life. You would never do that to anyone. You would never show your work like that, like spinning it round to reveal it, or pulling it from the curtain or something like that. It's an action that you take only for the attention economy, to grab attention. And therefore it feels completely inauthentic and strange. And I think that colonization of the studio, where you're constantly thinking, should I be filming this? Is this something that is going to relate to people on a video? How can I set up the camera? Every time you're trying to experiment and work, like we were talking about last week, starts to get in the way of everything you're doing. And then trying to perform for the attention economy as an artist gets you to do these actions that make no sense to you or to your practice. And that starts to become a question of authenticity then. How does one begin to speak in these formats of social media and the attention economy when the very thing that you're doing feels opposite to who you are? Now, a lot of people can look past that and kind of perform a role, and amazing to those people who can do that, but a lot of artists cannot. And I feel that the sensitivity that artists have in these areas, it's very different when it's from just being like an influencer, where it's shared experiences, like I said, a get ready with me video, a trip to a cafe, or come with me to this place, or whatever else. Everyone does those kind of things, but not everyone makes art in a space that is very personal to them. So there isn't this pattern. And then it becomes a question of authenticity. Authenticity has become a huge issue within the attention economy, especially because of this strange, hyperreal, performative world that attention economy creates, which feels very inauthentic to artists. So on from that, I'm going to look a little bit at the amazing philosopher Byung-Chul Han, who's a Korean-born German philosopher, and his book, The Loss of Ritual. He has some amazing books that have just started to be translated in the last few years into English. And in the book, The Loss of Ritual, he's talking about how contemporary digital age has changed the idea of ritualized behavior and what that means for us as a culture. Is fascinating. And chapter 2 is called The Compulsion of Authenticity. And so I'm going to read for you a little couple of pieces from Authenticity here, Compulsion of Authenticity. The society of authenticity is a performance society. All members perform themselves, all produce themselves. Everyone pays homage to the cult of the self, the worship of the self, in which everyone is his or her own priest. Today, authenticity in contemporary world and in the attention economy becomes about performance, not about doing something that is authentic to you, but performing a vision of authenticity for others to consume and to capture their attention. He quotes Charles Taylor, who is a Canadian philosopher, another brilliant philosopher, who talks about the authenticity needing a moral force, something like something beyond yourself, a community, a religion, a purpose, but that when without that, authenticity becomes trivial. And Hahn goes on to say that from this perspective, authenticity and community are not mutually exclusive. They need to come together. To be authentic is to be part of a bigger vision, of a bigger idea, of a bigger purpose, connected to a larger world. The problem is, of course, that with terms of social media and the attention economy, authenticity and community are totally mutually exclusive. And Hahn goes on to say that authenticity is, in fact, the enemy of community. And it's because of the narcissistic tendencies within the performance of authenticity that actually undermines the whole idea of community itself. Let me read another bit for you here. So he's talking about it in terms of like neoliberal authenticity, I guess. The neoliberal regime exploits morality. Once it's able to present itself as freedom, domination becomes complete because authenticity is a neoliberal form of production. You exploit yourself voluntarily in the belief that you're realizing yourself. In the cult of authenticity, the neoliberal regime appropriates the person and turns them into a highly efficient site of production, and the whole person is incorporated into the production process. And he goes on to talk about how the cult of authenticity leads to extreme narcissistic introspection with a kind of permanent focus and occupation with one's own like psychology. What am I doing right? How am I getting it right? How am I showing myself to other people? Am I saying the right things? Am I doing the right things, etc.? And he again goes on to say this amazing quote: within the cult of authenticity, the production of the self becomes a permanent activity. So therefore, this self that you're trying to realize within the attention economy to look good and valuable and performable is never realized, and it continues on and on and on. And he says authenticity thus atomizes society, meaning separating it into smaller spaces and separating us from one another. As when we have no kind of collective goal in our performance other than to grab attention, there's no collected goal within ourselves or with each other. We just become atomized from each other, small sites of production, no longer like just like companies, even just working for ourselves entirely within our own atomized production site. Incredible. So it's just a lot to think about, isn't it? Let's go on to this next section here. The important thing then, Hahn goes on to say, is that the society of authenticity is a society of intimacy and exposure. This is coming back to what I was saying about the Get Ready With Me video, right? And sort of showing behind the scenes. The idea of being authentic now is very much connected with the idea of being honest, bearing your soul, showing the real you behind the scenes, which is very different to how people would have interacted even 50 to 100 years ago. I was talking with my father-in-law about this the other day, and he was saying to me that he found it amazing that in the sort of 40s and 50s, and even when he was very young in the late 50s and growing up in the 60s, that a lot of people lived together in these communal houses quite easily. And it wasn't sort of seen as housemates. Everyone had their room, and there's like a landlady who served everyone. And he was like, the way that people got through that was by not sharing anything with each other at all, by not bearing anything with one another. And that was the kind of most authentic self you could have in that moment, was the idea of performing a politeness to one another and keeping it all in. Of course, there's a lot of problems with that. But on the other hand, we've now gone to the extreme end of, to be kind of real and authentic is to expose oneself entirely. And for artists to like show behind the scenes your process, your thought making, everything, to show your story, your narrative, your value. And Hahn calls this the nudism of the soul, into which we are encouraged, which lends society a pornographic character, which I think is quite interesting. And when you think about the performed intimacy of showing behind the scenes, is very similar to kind of the pornographic idea of a performed sense of intimacy and the secrecy of things. Social relations are more genuine and authentic the more intimate they are, the more that they reveal what was private. And I think that's particularly hard for artists because a lot of us don't really understand how we're supposed to show that privacy out to the world that we're being called to be authentic with. Because the moment of privacy for an artist is so much about play and about experimentation. The problem is the areas of play and experimentation are not commodifiable places, and it's very hard to make those into a reel or make those into a space in which you're showing yourself from within. And in fact, Hahn calls play, he calls it the holy seriousness of play and exploration, which has then given way instead to the endless performance and compulsion of work, because showing this self and performing this self have no time for play. Because in the attention economy, you need to have market value right now. Your work needs to be showing that it is valuable somehow into this world. And I remember reading in Cal Newport's book, the what's it called? Digital minimalism, how a lot of workers, and there was some statistics coming out around people who were kind of being watched working, and by a lot of things like Slack channels and other ways that corporations work these days, like offices. There's this sense that you have to be observed to be looking like you're working, and that actually most people are spending their time performing a vision of what looks like authentic productivity, but not actually getting any deep work done, because meetings and showing up to the Slack channel and showing your mouse moving and looking like you've hit certain targets are the most important things within the cycle. Even Hahn goes on to talk about James Bond, how much the James Bond films have changed. That in the early James Bond films, for all their strangeness and weirdness, the end of them was always James Bond relaxing, and like a time of rest after the crazy mission, and having a drink or whatever else, right? Whereas now, in most of the James Bond films, including, I can't remember, I don't know what the most recent one was. I've never seen a James Bond film myself, but that's something to that's a revelation, isn't it? That's me revealing my nudist hidden nature from behind the scenes. In the last James Bond film, he finishes the meeting and then he immediately gets a call and it says, "There's much more work to do. Are you ready?" And James Bond says, "With pleasure, madam." So the idea of like rest post work is gone, and that even James Bond just is desperate to get into the next project. So coming back to artists, then, this mental loop of trying to share things and be part of the attention economy, but not really knowing what to share. So then sharing a kind of performed intimacy or privacy that you see other people doing, but doesn't feel authentic to you, becomes more important than your actual work that you're making. And then you get stuck in this strange cycle. So then, what might be some ways of dealing with some of these issues of our struggles? What I think is this struggle with authenticity when it comes to the attention economy. So here's some false solutions, right? I have an app on my phone called Minimal Phone. Some of you might have come across that before. And it's an app that kind of is designed to give friction before using certain apps, so you can decide how long you're going to use them, and then it will kick you out after that time. These things are really cool, I think, and can be really helpful in slowing you down and becoming present. But the problem is that more apps don't solve the issue at the heart. And back to Cal Newport again, he said that a lot of these apps become short-lived. The irony being, of course, it's like another product which you add on top of the products you're already using, right? But also, that they don't work long enough, and then we find out that they glitch, or we've got ways round them, and then we're just back in the cycle again, because what actually needs to happen is a full reevaluation of your relationship with technology based on your values, not just more apps stacked on top of one another. So sometimes people think like a solution to the attention economy is to use another app or get something that locks my phone in a box or something like that. That has sort of short-term effect, but really it's not dealing with the root issue, which is the strangeness of the attention economy and being part of it in the first place. Another solution that I don't think is helpful is what's called ROE, or results only work environments. Now, sometimes these have been like suggested to be like a really good idea, that they are essentially companies and spaces that allow people to work as long as they like, wherever they like, as long as they get the results, right? Results only work environment. And Jenny Odell, coming back to the great Odell, talks about this in a lecture on the attention economy, and that the problem is the word environment, it doesn't have a definition there. Essentially, the word environment means anywhere, any place, anytime. And the problem is that that is a totally colonializing issue, because then work can be anywhere. That means anywhere you go can be a work environment. So work is everywhere. And there's no, and then you can begin to feel this guilt by not doing the work that can be anywhere, by separating work into another space and attention into a different space. You can move between these things. But when you have results only work environments, much like social media consumes everything, it starts to colonize your entire life. She says then that it's so difficult then to find any time for anything, because time becomes itself an economic resource that we can no longer justify spending on nothing, because it's too expensive. We must be doing something all the time. All time becomes commercial, and it completely compromises any leisure or space for rest or thought that we might have. Just looking at my notes here. I hope it's all making sense, friends. I've got so many million things here written down. I'm trying to sort of pick and choose what I think might be most helpful for you today. As always, the questions and comments are open. So if you've got any thoughts, please do drop them in. And I think she also talks about the idea of the loss of public space within the attention economy, that the difference between a true public space, like an open park, a garden, a library, and a kind of commodified attention economy space, is that in the true public space, you're not being asked to buy something or look at something or react to something in any way. You can just simply be there and pay attention to your environment. Whereas in a lost public space, in a kind of commodified space, all of it is commercial, and also all of it is policed. And I think we can see that in social media as well. So that when you think about the digital spaces that we inhabit, so much of it is asking us constantly to react to it in some way, or forcing a reaction out of us. And then also these places are heavily policed. People are shadow banned all the time, get their accounts closed. I lost one of my accounts a couple of years ago, as some of you might remember, on Twitter when it was still Twitter. And as it turned to X, I lost a very large account that I realized I could never get back for no reason. And it's suddenly, you realize that it's all out of your hands. It's very interesting. Another false solution is the idea of how else we can resist the attention economy is by connection. Now, this might sound contradictory in some way. But actually, coming back to Odell here, she's saying there's a difference between just connectivity with others and actual sensitivity between people. Connectivity, she's saying, which is again social media's adage, we're here to connect to each other through the world. It's actually just about information traveling as fast as possible, like putting train lines down or battery packs next to each other. It's about making the chain quicker. It's not about slowing things down. Whereas sensitivity is like branching off on a track and stopping and looking. We never have enough time to be able to stop and look in the attention economy. And so we need to really attune ourselves to sensitive attention. Because as Odell talks about, attention is actually relational, not extractive. And she draws a lot on ecological thinking that real attention, paying attention, is situated, it's reciprocal, and it's slow. And that contrasts sharply with capitalism's version of attention, which is fast, shallow, and instrumental. And artists will recognize that difference immediately because creativity and play comes from attunement to the space that you're in and deep focus, not efficiency and speed and making things as quick connections as possible. Another thing we might be tempted to do then as another false solution is the idea of, hearing everything I've said today or over the last few weeks and just being like, fuck it all then. And it's like the idea of escape as a form of getting out of the attention economy or resisting the attention economy. Now, that in some sense might have some positive roots to it. And I constantly fall into sort of dream cycles of thinking about living in the woods or the mountains or in the middle of the sea or something like that. It's not realistic, but it's like a kind of deep call, I feel like, to get away from everything. And on the one hand, it's kind of based on another performed life. Like I said, that this living in the woods would somehow solve everything, but it's without the reality of actually doing that and any of the pain that causes and the struggle. But actually, what it does serve to do, those sort of escape narratives and the idea of fuck it all, I need to get out of this, then, is that it shows you that that's kind of the leaf, if you know what I mean, of the tree, the sort of fuck it all leaf. That's what we're going to call it. But the root is beneath that. And the root might be something that's actually missing in your life, which the attention economy often draws out, which is ritual, embodied, natural time and space. And so, therefore, it's kind of telling you, no, you don't need to actually radically escape the attention economy and fuck everything and burn my phone and live in the mountains. But it might be saying to you, you actually need to intentionally make time away from these forms of attention to have real attention, which is attuned, embodied, and focused on things that are actually occurring in front of you. Okay, we're running out of time a bit, and I've still got quite a few notes, so I'm just going to look at what can be good for us then. So, what can be positive then for us as artists in resisting the attention economy and the strangeness of feeling inauthentic in a performed social media world? Well, going back to Jenny Odell again, I think she says this idea is that we need to enact in our life, so really take it upon ourselves, a removal from the habitual or the everyday actions of things like the attention economy. You need to actually do it. You actually need to go and do it, and it be a real physical thing that happens, moving yourself away from sensationalism and being drawn in by, like I said, the difference between attention and attending at the start, a form of attention that you actually hate into a form of attending to things that you actually love. So that means spending time in what Jenny Odell calls physical, unoptimized environments, environments that aren't calling on you to constantly purchase or perform or become something, or as Han was saying, the narcissistic performance production site of the authenticity attention economy and the authenticity cult, unoptimized environments. So she talks about spending time with birds. And she has got to know these two crows that come near her house all the time. And she started putting nuts out for them and watching what they did, spending time doing that each day. Then started throwing nuts out to them. And then she realized they would do these dives and catch them. Now the crows have brought other friends back, and there's sort of 3 or 4 of them that have come every single day. And she's been doing that for years. And it has become an unoptimized ritual space in which she can reclaim proper attention. She spends time in gardens and places that are not optimized for selling. And it's just about being still long enough to see what is actually in front of you. It's what Hahn calls scenic distance or negative time, actually having experiences of friction in your attention as well. So, the idea that things can be hard. Social media and the attention economy is either sensational or it's about you becoming happier. Hacks to make your life better, things that you're missing, things that you haven't done, things that if you are feeling shit about life, it's not systemic, it's to do with you and your performance. And my authentic performance is me changing my life, and we're all doing the authenticity performance together and atomizing ourselves from each other. So actually coming back to real negative frictional time where we have difficulty in doing things can be so helpful for reclaiming attention. He uses the example of when there's so much information available, becomes no friction, and actually we end up knowing less in this strange way by having more information. So he's an example of a number of years ago, if you needed to know something, you would have to go to the library, and then maybe you go to that library, but someone else has already checked the book out, but there's another one in the library up the road. So you go up to that library instead, but then you realize that that copy's gone as well. And on the way home, you bump into someone, you get talking with them, and they say, oh, there's a bookshop round the corner. You go there and you find the book secondhand in there. That frictional journey where there was less access to the information brought about a kind of attention that is very different from immediacy. So I think it's about slowing things down, therefore. And you can do this as well, of course, most importantly, in community. It's having unoptimized communities as well, places where you can be slow and embodied with one another, where you can talk about play and experimentation beyond the idea of performing productivity or performing authenticity, of being yourself as best as you can. And I guess we've talked about this a lot the last few weeks, that it's very difficult to brand uncertainty and brand nuance, and that it's very difficult to build what looks like an authentic brand on, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, I'm trying things out, where actually that might be the most authentic space because it's the space of unoptimized play and creativity. So last thing to say is this can be done online as well. It's not saying that it's impossible within a digital sense. And this is what I'd said at the start. This is not a phone equals bad talk. That's not the case. What it is instead is to say that attunement and embodiment can happen in digital spaces and physical spaces, but they cannot happen in spaces that are designed to be only performed forms of attention. Yeah. Even if you try super hard, like on social media, which I've done many times, saving things, trying to create, conversations, there can be those little connections, but move it to somewhere else, to email, to in person, to a forum, to a discussion, into an exhibition, into your studio, into a collaboration. These are unoptimized spaces, and that's the space of true play, not authentic cult performance. There we go, friends. It's been an hour. Thank you so much for joining me, everyone. I hope you found some of that useful. So go out and get Jenny Odell's book, How to Do Nothing. It's all about this and looking at it from an artist perspective and looking at so many great performance artists and conceptual artists and her own work. Also, Byung-Chul Han's book, The Loss of Ritual. Anything by Byung-Chul Han is great, but particularly that if you're thinking about ritualized time and the embodiment of time and how to re-establish that in your life. And also Cal Newport's Digital Minimalism, if you're wanting to look at like the hardcore research around how these kind of companies are made and how you might reframe tech in terms of your own values. And then Timothy Wu's Attention Merchants, which is all about the fostering of the attention economy, as I talked about at the start, that history from Benjamin Day's first newspaper to the present. And I want to bring it all back again to Agnes Dean's Wheatfield, which is where we started. I think this Wheatfield for me is just the ultimate embodiment of all these ideas. This space that stops you in your tracks, a space of real attention because it disturbs and enacts the disturbance of the everyday. It's truly authentic because it is itself. It's not a performance of itself. It was a real wheat field in the middle of Manhattan. And the fact that it moves itself away from the speed and finance focus of optimized production spaces into a space of embodied slowness. And I think that's the best place for us to be as artists. Friends, it's been a joy doing artist questions with you. I love you so much. Have a wonderful end to your year, and I will see you in the new year in some form. I'm not sure what yet. But love you all and have a great end of the year and a great Christmas. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now, friends.